Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be making drum knowledge from the brain, and it's going to be great. So we're going to take like a sample. This is probably like not very an appropriate one. So okay. So we're going to talk about like transient processing. I guess we'll go into like side chaining, like making ghost kicks, and we'll talk about parallel compression and just like how to process and organize drums in general, or how I do it at least. So we're going to take this, attempt to bounce it to the drum machine. Okay, so I have my drum loop, and it's going to be like a little fast-ish. So now what we're gonna do is think about, oh, what does this need? So it sounds okay. We could look at it with an EQ. And it looks pretty good, although there's a bunch of junk down here. Which is up to whoever's making this if they want to take that out. So now we have a little bit of like a repeat kind of. If we look at this and do a Q. So I'm gonna go through and remove any like repeat things. So this is our drum machine now. So here's some things about this. So it depends on what genre you're doing, but personally I would do this. So I would Command G, make a group, and then I'd basically delete the kick and snare to this one. So now we have double like hi-hats, then go delete the hi-hats out of this one. So now they're sorted when I come in here to the mixer and I want to actually look at them. They have separate mixing channels, which is pretty nice when we get into things such as like, so now we can look at these separately in the instrument layer. So like we could put a Pro Q here now, put a Pro Q here at the end of like these ones. Now they're individual. So if we look at this one, we'll see we'll have that's just kick and snare, and then over here we've got which is this. Now the reason I do this is so I can make this a little nicer and then go get rid of like everything after 600. Or not, it depends again on the genre you're mixing, or what elements do you have in this area here that will take up the space, because usually around 600 is good, but then there might be like, but there's information down there obviously, like if we listen to this. There's some fairly important stuff, but if you listen to it, it's actually just all mud, so that's good again for whatever genre you're mixing. Maybe I'll just leave this here for now. So we have this. The drum loop already sounds fairly good by itself. There's no point to really get into EQing because again, it's like genre specific, but some things you need to know when doing drums essentially is right now we'll look at the transient stuff and then creating stereo for drums without actually making it sound bad. So first thing, parallel compression. So in audio, say if we take the same drum loop and we look zoomed in, we have these samples. Too zoomed in might be bad, but you can see how basically at the start of every sample it's like kind of everything's triangle shaped. So the starting few seconds here is called a transient. This is where the onset starts. So basically the transient is like this area right here, and then anything after, like this stuff, is like the sustain, and then you can basically adjust where those areas are. But the attack is like those sharp peaks right at the start, so I can accentuate those, and you can hear what I mean. So if I put a compressor, say just on this right here, I'm telling the compressor I want lots of attack. Okay. Now if I bounce this as a separate track, you gotta be careful when doing this because transients are very bad for your ears. See what I've done. I've made the starting frequencies compared to the original non-compressed one. I've actually really messed with the sound here. Like if you kind of look at these two snares here, you can see this one's really thick at the start. Same thing with this. Like they're all these have much fatter startings to them, which make them like really punchy, and that's what it is. So like if you listen to this, it's too much. So the workaround to this is either using a transient compressor or doing what's called parallel compression, and not a transient compressor, a transient processor. It's technically a compressor. So what parallel compression is when you take an effect track and it has compression. This will not work in FL Studio because of latency. As far as I know, you're gonna have to use a transient processor. Some DAWs that don't offer like smack on, like absolutely zero delay in milliseconds, you can't parallel compress. It's very crucial to have zero latency when parallel compressing. So for example, Bitwig, if I use an effect track, like basically sending it to another place, so I have two audio sources both going to the master now, so it's like this. Now it's like twice as loud. This has zero delay. There is no delay on this track. You'll notice my drums don't sound phased. They just sound louder. So that's important for this, because essentially what we want to do is take one track where the attacks of the same drum loop are basically being accentuated very hard, and then we add those attacks to our drum loop to basically control the volume of the attack. So this is essentially the proper way to do transient processing, and then there's transient controls, which are the quick, easy way of doing it really fast. So what we do now is we drop this down. I already want like a hard attack, like probably around 50, no release time. Okay, maybe not no release time, but like 40, and then like 4 ratio, and then probably like negative 31 is always a good spot for drums. And then now we mix this in. And now we've processed the transients, and if we bounce this in place, oops, and then drag it up here to an audio track, and look at this at the same gain, we can see, yep, we have actually affected the transients versus our original drum loop. I don't like if you remember what it looks like, but essentially this second peak here is much higher than it was in the original drum loop, where it was much lower. So this is how we've been doing. This is us doing it. You can hear the difference here. It's always a careful thing. You might not hear too much of a difference. That's because your ears are trying to reject that sound, sort of, because it's in the attack range and our ears don't really like it that much, but it does add an overall taste. That's why it's a very careful process you have to go about, but that's essentially that. Or our second option is we can take a transient plugin. If you're familiar with Transient Master by Native Instruments, it's got attack, basically. It's got like attack gain and sustain gain. And then they're like they're already set in place, sort of. I don't believe you can actually move them, cause I'm not sure. 100%, but from my understanding, that was an overall gain, and this was the, yeah. So you have like an attack gain, a sustained gain, then an overall gain with a limiter, and that's what that does. But then if you go into something more detailed, which is kind of pathetic that Bitwig has this, not that, but if we go into something a little more detailed here, we'll see that we have gain and time of an attack section. So now we can, again, see how fast that escalates. Like, it's very, take caution of your ears. So we can use this. This will kind of determine how long does it last for. So if we look at this graph down here, it's like the smoothness, how fast does it bring the transient back down, sort of. So it's like, it's essentially a compressor, this one. And we can affect the sustain, which is the after part, and then we can take it away. I find that's a very good tactic for repairing drums, is to take away certain transients. It's very, very nice. Or even on basses that have too much like transients, you can do that. That's why it's called transient controls. You can take away or add transients. So our options were this or this. You can hear how they sounded just about the same. Like, it's the same concept. You're making the peaks louder. So that's what that is for, and that is a very big part of drum processing and makes a huge difference. You can take the dumbest drum samples, process the transients right, and then it'll sound much better, because usually the problem with a lot of drum libraries is that there is no transient in the kick, and I believe that's done on purpose, but or not. And that's something you need to watch out for. This will show, like, this graph here shows you specifically. Some of them let you actually like affect transients based on other signals, like it can be MIDI controlled or whatever. And yeah, so we'll just go with the transient control as our thing, just because it's done. So we have transient control now. Good. Real quick, let's look into gating, because if you have a messy drum loop like this, if you want it to be cleaner, because that has cool effects, in my opinion. If you have something like that, basically set a threshold, the loudest peaks will trigger it, and then it comes through, and then based on how loud the average peaking is related to RMS, will determine how long the gate stays open. So that means that because the kick and the snare have way more loudness and power in them, the whole body part, the weak hi-hats with thin bodies and just basically the attacks will just kind of like fade in a like bit, like really fast and out, where the kick and the snare come in hard and then fade out. And yeah, okay, now this drum loop sounds good and all, but the one thing it lacks is basically any use in mixing. You could put this down, put something on top of it, it's useless. I'll open up like a song I'm working on right now in a minute, and we'll explore that. And then if we basically want to do is, again, with the effect tracks, is we come in, make an effect track. I'm going to use Pro R, and we send this all the way to this thing here. It's going to sound ridiculous, but this is good. You want to listen to it like this, and then just kind of like sound design a room. And real quick, that thing people are always saying, like, oh, high pass everything under 300. That's a bunch of crap. Like, don't. It's all about what you hear. Essentially, under 125 is the most important part. But in the mastering part, that gets fixed. Don't just, like, remove all the reverb under 300. Just do what sounds nice. And then take that in consideration when you're mixing. If you're not very good at mixing, then maybe do things like that. But, see here, I'm just cutting 50 with 12, and then I'm doing like a 220 around where the fundamental of the kick is. I'm just trying to, or not the, sorry, the attack. No, the fundamental. I'm trying to take down the bit of that so it's not so harsh, and then I'm going to come in, add some slower decay time on the low end. Maybe boost it. Gotta try. Maybe I want it to be dark. Maybe I want this to be a wood room, so there's not going to be much high. Then you determine, do I want it to be far? Do I want it to be like realistic or chorus, more phasing? Bright, dark. And now drag it all the way down. Because, like, you want your mixes to sound as out of the box as possible, so then that way people aren't, like, can obviously tell, like, something was just lazily done in a DAW. Because, like, if you listen to a drum loop that's like this, it's kind of lazily done. If you were to listen to it by itself. Now, you've slightly, somewhat, possibly fooled someone that it sounds like it's in a room. And when you go to mix that in, that sounds a lot better. So over here, check this out. This is what the drum loop sounds like. So we have this track. If we muted this, if you have the ears for it, and in passive listening, if you're sitting here watching this tutorial, like really trying to focus on it and you're not hearing it, it's because you're trying to focus on it and you don't have the ear training for it. But as a passive listener, just listening to a song, you will notice these things ever so slightly in like determining like a good mix from a bad mix. So like essentially, if your drums just have zero room and zero stereo on them, it's not going to sound good when you try to mix it into a song that 50% of the mixing relies on the stereo aspect of it. So if we look at the master oscilloscope, we lose just like a little bit of stereo energy in there. But then, like, you know, because I have things like really loud, like stereo things, so why would it make sense to have something just completely mono? And then, like, especially like, God, that's loud. And then, like, this is a Pro R again. This might be more wood. Yeah, this is wood designed as well, a little bit. You can make it wide. I'm hearing that kick a lot in the background. I can hear it. It sounds much better when it's in stereo behind you like that. Or when it's in the whole room, sorry. It sounds much more like well executed. It sounds like you could have fooled someone it was recorded. That's something that's done on, like, you know, when you put ambience mics on drums, because you want the ambience of the drums. Like, you want to hear the stereo aspects the drums have to offer, if that makes sense. Back to this, one last thing I have to talk about. 2 more things to cover. So essentially, we have our dope drum loop. We have our hi-hats here. Now, what do we want to do with these? You see, you could start panning them, and that's actually really cool. Just pan them a little bit. Sometimes not too ridiculously. Again, it depends. It's all... Like, if I do this, this sounds hilarious. To a small extent, it contributes to the room thing. It stops, like, your drums sounding like they're here in the mix and makes them sound like more like here, maybe. Like with the hi-hats, it opens up the wideness, which will accentuate the power and your focus to the drums. So it's nice to have them here, and then the rest of your mix is going to be like here, but like it helps to make it less middle, because if it's too middle, then it's very complicated to, it won't sound good if it's too middle. So it's nice to pan your hi-hats like a little bit, because then you maybe, it kind of sounds like you're listening to a drum set in the middle of the room, versus where if it's just all in the middle, it's like there's a guy sitting, there's like a line of drummers, and one of them has each instrument, and they're all playing with each other, like playing one instrument at a time at the same time to make this drum kit sort of thing. Last thing, if you take like literally any synth, if you don't have like basically a white noise generator that you can trigger with MIDI, I would recommend Massive, because it takes like 0 CPU. So you make it sound like this. And then you want to make sure it doesn't make any audio anywhere, because we're going to make a trigger right now. You take a compressor and peak. Sorry, before we take the audio off, what we actually want is to come into here and go to the envelope and make this sort of something like that, right? And then we can max out the volume, no output. And then now we come into the compressor, low threshold, maximum attack, no release, really high ratio, and we do this. And it's gonna do something ridiculous like this on the limiter. And then you basically just do that, like that. There we are. And now what we do is we come in and make sure your track is at 0 decibels, and we now have a like max volume, very consistent trigger. This is all you need. Some people like to use hi-hats. I'm like sort of against hi-hats, because say you're making a song and use a different type of hi-hat, the transients are always going to be different. It might be a little thicker or whatnot. So if you do it like this is your safe bet. Like if it's just like a click, like the smallest click, and then you press it, it's always going to be the same volume, because the volume of your trigger does matter. There's going to be barely the smallest little delay, but it's fine. But then now you can use this as a really effective trigger, and I use this in like everything. Like this track, it's a polysynth with all noise, and then again like all the amplitude modulations, like anything, are off, so it doesn't even make a sound, just clicks. And then I just basically explode the attacks, and then that's it. That's all there is. So yeah. And that was my talk on drums. Hopefully you learned something essentially with what I'm doing here. The rest of this would be like essentially EQing, like if you want, like look at this kick. Looks okay. I could use a little more here, a little less over here, like that, and then some more here, and some needs to go here. And get rid of a little bit of this, and then blow up some of that. Now it sounds a little more present, but like aside from just EQing crap like this, like there's nothing really that is worth telling people. Trying to teach people, like, because EQing is a whole separate thing and such a complicated topic, and no one's ever going to be satisfied with anything I can say on the subject. Like, oh, you should EQ this way. For the purposes of this, maybe I'll just EQ this. So this is what it sounded like now. Sound like this before. This sounds better, obviously. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go after the bass stuff a little bit. My EQ is very subtle, because you can ruin your sound. This actually might sound nice down here. Get rid of that crap. If you don't know how EQs work to the fullest extent, essentially, you have a, if I take down this frequency here, I'm not doing as much as I think I am. Wait, no, other way around. If I'm adding frequencies here, I'm not adding as much as effectively as I am. Like it's not gonna add nearly as much volume as I think it does, and it's not gonna add it very much unless I make a high Q value. But then if I make a high Q value, then I'm targeting things incorrectly with phase. So then what you have to do is you have to lower the things around it to effectively raise that frequency without like having the spectrum get too full and then stop actually hearing the detail. So like, if I'm going to raise these frequencies, I need to lower these frequencies, which is convenient because the stuff here is useless. Then the stuff in here is useless. And you might be like, okay, well, I cut out the 25 hertz of my master anyways. That doesn't matter because for this sound specifically, you're not cutting them out. So that needs to be done at any time, because that sound, like if this kick is like not having things taken out here, it doesn't matter that I'm doing it on the master. Like I'm cutting everything under 25, because for the purposes of this sound, this 25 hertz being played before it's being cut in the master is still affecting this sound. So you need to get rid of it here to whatever way you need to, regardless of what you do afterwards in the master. The master is not some prime solution for all your sound design in your mix, not even a mastering EQ, like cutting the lows, the low mids and low sides, and then like high stereo sides, high stereo. That's not a solution for the current sound design issues you have at the time or any EQing. So that stuff doesn't matter. So if I do this, okay, I got rid of this. Got rid of some of this. You probably can't hear it. Got a little more oomph. And then a little more root. And then I got some attack. This is where the attack is. But I want this attack. I want some high attack. Because that's a little too muddy, because this is where the mud is. Mud's over here. Attack's up here. Sounds nice. And then I took down some of this. Could take down some more if I want. Subtle differences. I basically made the kick more kick by adding more, like I'm accentuating more of the kick features, such as the sub and the low end attacks, and then some of the MIDI attacks that have to go with it. And then I've basically tried to carve out things a little more. And if we look at this at the regular fab filter, this is what I've done in the regular fab filter view. I haven't went too extreme. I have my EQ set to 6, so that way you really understand what you're doing when you EQ, and then you don't EQ as much, which is good because it saves your mixes. So it's good to understand what you're doing. So keep the graphs low, because if you're like EQ, soon as you hit past like 7, because the scale's at 6, it's gonna zoom out, and then you're gonna be like, oh wow, that's too much. Because if you're EQing and this does that, you're doing too much, in terms of like precision aspects. Okay. So kick done, snare. Okay, what do I do to my snare? Is this... No, it's not. Okay, cool. Look at my snare. Let's see. First of all of this is useless. It's just that. You barely hear that. Might as well just get rid of it. And then what else we got? We got... This stuff's kind of annoying. This stuff's kind of annoying. That stuff's nice. That's nice. This stuff's nice. So what I'm going to do is kind of target this. And I like this stuff, but I think I'm going to have to cue this a bit. And then I said I didn't like this. The drum set. I've basically controlled the frequencies of the snare a bit here, with this sort of motion. And as far as the hi-hats go, I'm gonna have to right away say you shouldn't like specifically EQ each hi-hat, like do your hi-hats or whatever, like. That sounds nice. We could listen to these individually. And that's how I would do that. And then I would basically add my instruments, and I already even have a sidechain. And it's good to go. So yeah. Thanks for watching.